So today I'm talking with Brittany. Is it Pollitt?
Polat.
Pollat, yeah. Is it French? Is it French?
Turkish. My husband is
Oh,
Turkish.
oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I don't know why I thought it sounded French. Um, yeah, from a parent Stoic, and we're going to talk about some ways that Stoicism has helped her as a parent, and how she applies the philosophy to parenting. How are you today, Brittany?
A little bit tired. My youngest two children didn't sleep well last night, but that's how it goes as a parent, right?
And yeah, thank you for coming on. So let me just ask you some questions. So the Stoic philosopher Epictetus talks about what he calls the dichotomy of control. That they're basically everything in life falls into two categories: things that you can control and things that you can't. And basically, he thinks that the only things that you can control are your own doing, more or less. You can clarify that if you want. But what's difficult about applying that to parenting is that Epictetus assumes that other people are one of the things that we don't have any control over. um,
Right.
but as a parent, it's not to say that you control your children, but you certainly have more influence over them than most people do in a normal situation, like with other adults. So I was just wondering how you reconcile that.
Yeah, I think that is the most difficult question, the single most difficult question as a Stoic parent, for exactly the reasons you said. You don't control other people. I think part of it has to do with the way that our society is today. We have a very different parenting culture than has existed in many cultures in the past. And I think, kind of in general, our Western culture today, we're so used to being able to control things. We have so much more control over our environment and our lives than anyone has before. So to us, it seems normal that we should be able to control things or arrange our lives in order to control other things. So when we have children, we're expecting, to be able to take action, and that action will result in a certain desired outcome. And when you have children, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Children children have their own needs and personalities. So I think part of the problem is our culture today. And to me, I see that there's this whole issue of helicoptering, right? Helicopter parenting, where parents want to control their child's life. They think that they're helping their child. They do it for a good cause. But in the end, it makes everyone miserable because you simply cannot control the child. And to me, it helped me to step back and think about it logically. Okay, so let's say I am late, I'm rushing to get out the door. I need my 3-year-old to get his shoes on. So what do I do? Can I control what he does? No. How do I handle this situation? So you can see this on my blog too, I made a list of every single option that I have as a parent in that situation, ranging from very undesirable, like physically forcing him and picking him up and putting him in the car, and to things that are more desirable, like encouraging him, coaxing him, that kind of thing. So when I actually listed every single option, it was a very helpful exercise for me because I realized, hey, no matter what, I'm not going to control him. So I need to figure out how to adjust myself in order to make the situation better. So I think what I've come to realize is, you mentioned this in the beginning, we can influence our children, but we can't control them. I think that's a very crucial distinction. If you have the idea that you control your child or that you should control your child, you will always be frustrated and disappointed because it's never going to happen. It's not your brain controlling his body, right? It's his brain. So logically, it's impossible for you to control him. Once you step back and focus on, okay, how can I influence him? Then you can focus more on your own actions. And this goes along with what William Irvine recommends in his book, A Guide to the Good Life.
Yeah.
It's a great book. So if any of you viewers haven't seen it, I really recommend it. But he talks about internalizing your goals. So you focus on what you can do in that situation. So I can encourage my son to get his shoes on, or I can prepare him the night before to get his shoes on so he's not cranky in the morning. those kinds of things. Once you start focusing on what you can do, your attitude kind of changes. Interacting with your child becomes a lot less stressful, because if you're hovering and trying to control every action of his, you're stressed out, and so is he. Your child is probably not going to respond well to that. Once you focus on your own actions as a parent, it changes the game.
Yeah, I think I read that post. Didn't you also list as an option telling him you were going to leave without him, but it only worked once?
Right.
That works with my son sometimes.
Yeah, you can't use it too often. They'll figure it out.
Yeah, he's going to figure it out. Yeah, I think he might have figured it out already. That's funny. Yeah, so you mentioned in your Cardinal Rules of Stoic Parenting post, which is kind of an overview of the topic that you have up on your site, kind of like an FAQ. You know, in order to be a good parent, you sort of have to embody the ideal that you'd want your child, you know, or your ideal for your child. Like you try to personify what you'd want your child to be. So what does that ideal look like for you? And also, what have you struggled with, you know, when trying to apply that?
Yeah, so I have a very idealistic picture in my head of the perfect parent that I would want to be. And I know I will never actually reach that ideal, but to me, it's very helpful even just to have that picture in my mind, so that I think, okay, you know, if I'm about to get frustrated here, or if I don't know what the right decision is, what would this parent do? So my ideal is someone who is very courageous, because that's something that I've struggled with as a parent, is anxiety and worrying about my kids. So my ideal parent is very courageous, very kind in interacting with his or her kids. It could be a dad, it could be a mom. So understanding, you know, approaching discipline from a sense of empathy and a desire to teach, rather than a desire to discipline or enforce rules. I try to think about how my ideal parent would be a teacher and a guide, do it all with a sense of gentleness and kindness. So it really helps me, especially, you know, like I mentioned with the anxiety. This is something that I had a huge problem with, especially before my first child was born. You know, I remember reading a magazine at a maternity appointment, and the parenting magazines, you know, they have lists of things you should do with your child and things you shouldn't do. And I remember reading this and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to do all this. I'm going to ruin my child. You know, baby powder will give her asthma. You know, car seats, you must take the car seat to the fire station to have a professional install it, because you're never going to do it the right way. Like, I read these things in a magazine and I guess I just really internalized all the dangers in the world. And it took me a long time. I mean, I have 3 kids now, so of course, over time, I've kind of learned, well, you know, maybe these things aren't quite as risky as the parenting industry wants you to think. But that I think there is this huge culture of guilt and worry and anxiety surrounding parenting in Western culture. So to me, Stoicism has really helped me deal with that. Another way that it's helped, not just having the ideal parent, but thinking about Marcus Aurelius. You know, he was the Roman emperor, the most powerful man on earth. And in his meditations, we can still read how he struggled with his anxiety about his children's health. And he actually, you know, the Roman world they didn't have good medical knowledge. It was a dangerous time for children. So he lost several of his children. And to me, it's so touching and really important to be able to read how he coped with that, how mentally he was able to deal with his anxiety. So in a way, it sounds strange for, you know, a 21st century mother to say, oh, look at what this ancient Roman emperor was doing. But to me, that has been very helpful in calming my own anxieties as well.
Yeah, that's a good verse. Doesn't he say something like, I see that my child is sick, but that he's in danger I don't see, or something like that. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
a good one to keep at hand if your child is sick. Yeah. Well, parents have struggled with that probably, you know, eternally. That'd probably never end until we live in some kind of utopia.
And that's another thing I find helpful about Stoicism, is taking the view from above, kind of stepping out or zooming out and reminding yourself that, when you're in a situation where you're frustrated or angry or sad, it feels like you're the only person in the world going through this. And it really helps to remember, okay, we have, is it 7 billion people on the planet now?
Something like that.
How many other parents right now are feeling the exact same thing that you are? Probably millions. How many children are misbehaving or are sick or are going through these things? Probably millions. So it helps me to feel more connected to humanity, I guess, and to not feel so alone and know that this is something everyone has to go through. If they can handle it, so can I.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, that's helpful. I should do that. Maybe I'm pessimistic, but I just I tend to think of how things could be worse. Or I think Marcus Aurelius has another verse that's be content if the smallest thing goes well. So that way you focus on, it could be anything, that during the course of the day something, and that really a lot of things go well. If you think about it, like most things go well, or they don't go poorly, But another cardinal rule that you mentioned, and you sort of spoke to this already, is that you don't control your child, but that society really thinks that, they seem to think you have full control over your child. If your child misbehaves in public, that it's because you're too soft on them, or, like if your child doesn't sleep through the night, then you failed to sleep train them properly, or that's kind of one of my pet peeves, or something like that. But yeah, so what part of the prevailing wisdom that we can control our children, or that, somehow parents are to blame for everything that happens is incorrect, do you think?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. And part of it to me is that we're kind of, professionals. We grow up being very highly educated these days, aiming for careers. We don't spend any time around children or seeing how children are raised.
Yeah.
In most traditional cultures, women grew up taking care of their brothers and sisters, their nieces and nephews. They were around children. And these days that doesn't happen. And I'm not saying I want to go back to the old way. I love the opportunities that we have now for women, and our choices as far as when to have children and how many to have. This is all incredible. It's an incredible gift for us. But at the same time, that means that when we become parents ourselves, a lot of us have absolutely no clue how it works. We have no idea what to expect. I certainly, before I had my kids, I had never really taken care of kids before. I didn't know what to do at all. And then since we are so educated and professionalized, I guess, we're used to seeing results. We're used to having goals that we can accomplish and saying, okay, if I do this, I'm going to reach this goal, and then doing it. And as I said before, it doesn't work that way with kids. So I think that we feel pressure from ourselves because we're so used to doing things that way. And then society has also kind of, it's a very adult society. If you're on an airplane and a baby cries, everyone rolls their eyes and gets annoyed, but that's what babies do, right? So I think our society is really structured around adults doing adult things and is not very understanding of the way that kids just are. So yeah, it's produces a lot of guilt, I think, and anxiety. And again, it results in that hovering and helicoptering. So the dichotomy of control, I feel like it helps us. It's really helped me to not be so concerned about what other people are thinking about my parenting. Yeah. We all know we have to deal with a lot of judgment as parents, from other people waiting in line at the grocery store to neighbors, teachers, family members, whoever. It seems like everyone is judging us. Yeah. So Stoicism has really helped me to think, well, I can't control those other people's opinions as well. All I can do is focus on doing what I can to help my child stop tantruming or whatever. But if those other people think that I'm a bad parent, so be it.
Yeah, well, it really involves like two Stoic virtues if you think about it, because there's practical wisdom in figuring out what might work and what could be applied to this situation. But then, like you said, even if you try something, it doesn't mean that it's going to work. It's just sometimes the best thing you can do is sort of try to, create an environment, like, especially for sleeping, like create an environment where sleep will overtake the child, but it doesn't mean that that's going to always work or something like that. So yeah, there's like an element. The other problem that I see with parenting advice is that a lot of it's contradictory. You know what I mean? It's like, you're getting just from both sides. There's opposite extremes, and there is an element of like, trying to figure out, what might work, but then always remembering go on.
That's why I really like Stoicism as a guide for parenting, because you could pick up any book from the self-help shelf and it'll tell you do this, and then another one will say do the opposite. How do you know who to trust? So Stoicism is, I feel like it's an anchor, and it's deep ancient wisdom, right? So if we use this as our guide, and of course it's not going to tell you how to sleep train your baby, but it tells you how to be a good person while you're sleep training your baby or potty training your toddler, which is also a big deal. So it doesn't give you that specific advice. I think it's fine to turn to contemporary experts for those kind of things, but I think we should fit the contemporary expert advice into our Stoic framework. So I feel like Stoicism is essentially a framework for helping us to make good decisions and use good judgment as a parent. So once you know what your values are, once you have your own mental processes going the right way, then you can turn to the expert strategies. So yes, of course, we have to use lots of strategies to get the baby to sleep or potty train or teach other things. But I feel like we need to first fit it into our value judgment framework,
Yeah, that sounds about right. But then there's also an element sort of courage in not wanting or not worrying too much about what other people think. So that's interesting.
Exactly.
It's multiple Stoic virtues applied to
Yes.
that. You mentioned also in your blog post about removing your ego from parenting. I think you've sort of already mentioned what that means, but isn't that kind of easier said than done?
Yes, of course. For me, that means don't take your child's behavior personally.
Okay.
So we tend to think, kind of like we said earlier, that if you have the idea that you control your child, it's like, okay, I want my child to get his shoes on. If my child doesn't get his shoes on, I'm a terrible parent. He's a terrible child. You take everything personally and see it as a reflection of your competence, maybe your virtue, whatever. To me, it really helps, again, kind of zooming out and taking the long view or the cosmic view. This is what kids do. This is what kids are like. Yes, we do need to teach them. He needs to know that he has to follow his parents' directions. But I can approach it from a sense of guidance and teaching instead of taking it personally and saying, why aren't you getting your shoes on? How could you do this to me? It's so easy to think that your child is intentionally doing stuff to make you angry. Maybe sometimes he is, but most of the time he's just doing what makes sense to him from his perspective. No, I don't want to get my shoes on. Why should I? He doesn't understand why it's to his benefit to get his shoes on.
Or maybe it's not to his benefit to get his shoes on. Or indirectly somehow, you need to go to the supermarket, so he needs it. I tell my son that we're gonna go get the things that he likes, and then I rattle them off. Like, I'm like, what are we gonna get when we go there, Everett? And then he'll tell me the good food that he wants from the supermarket. So I'm like, you better put your shoes on if you want to go get that and eat it.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. So you're kind of coaxing and using good things instead of focusing on trying to control him. You're focusing on what you can do and using a good strategy. I really like that.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the 3 disciplines, and then, maybe mention some specific tips about how you can teach them to children?
Okay, sure. So Stoic philosophy, especially in Epictetus, he talks a lot about the 3 disciplines or themes. One of them is discipline of desire, one is discipline of action and impulse, and one is the discipline of assent. So these are very in some ways they're very complex, and it can be hard to break them down or bring them down to a child's level. But I do think that we can start training kids from very early on about how to do this. So, for example, the discipline of desire, at the adult level, it means kind of accepting the world for the way it is. There are some things that you can work to change, and yes, you should work to change that. But there are some things that you're never going to change, and so it's better for your happiness to accept that you can't change, for example, human nature. So at the child level, I really talk about not getting what you want. So, if you want a second helping of ice cream, well, sorry, you can't have a second helping. You got your ice cream in the first place, but if you eat too much, you'll get a tummy ache. So I try to, when I can, I try to talk about it. I'm a big believer in talking through your ethics and explaining things to your kids. Sometimes you don't have time, but when you can, this helps them to understand that you have reasons for what you do. It's not just arbitrarily, do it because I want it that way. There's actually an ethical reason guiding your decisions, and that helps them understand that they should have an ethical reason guiding their decisions. Of course, that takes time to build up, but the more you talk about it, and I think even the earlier you talk about it, the more they can understand why you do the things you do and why they should do certain things. So, learning persistence and grit and patience, all those things that people are talking about now, you can start teaching those in the context of the discipline of desire. So then the discipline of action, this obviously is a big one for little kids because they have so many impulses that need to be controlled. And it's kind of the most natural one also because this involves interacting with other people. How do you behave towards others? So the golden rule is a big one. The golden rule, treat other people the way you want them to treat you. It's very obvious, it's very old-fashioned, but it's still a great place to start teaching the discipline of action. If you don't want him to take your ball, then you don't take his ball. Right? So I think you can bring this out pretty much anytime your kid is having trouble interacting with others. Sometimes he's not going to understand it, but sometimes he will. And I think all of this helps kids to learn how to step outside their own selves and think about things from other people's perspectives. So that's what I'm trying to get my kids to do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Let's let the silver rule: don't do to others what you don't want done to you.
That too.
That's funny. And then
the discipline of assent.
Yes, the third one.
Yeah, so this is the hardest one to teach to young children because it's more about using good judgment, which obviously they don't really have yet.
That's hard even for adults.
Yes. So to me, this is where you focus a lot on what you can control and deciding, some things are up to me, some things are not. And I think that you can find ways to start teaching this even to preschoolers. I work with it. So my children are 1, 3, and 5, and I work with them. Obviously, the 1-year-old, is not going to understand anything about this. The 3-year-old can start to understand, and my 5-year-old is already starting to use this a little bit. Her teacher at school told me the other day that I forgot to pack her snack. I was rushing around in the morning, so I forgot to pack her snack one day, and to a 5-year-old, this is kind of a tragedy. But my daughter was very good. She told her teacher, I feel like crying right now, but I'm not crying because it's okay. I can solve the problem. So she was learning, kind of combining the discipline of desire with the discipline of assent, that you have to deal with problems. You don't always get what you want, but we can work this out. I talk with them a lot about, okay, is this a big problem? Is this worth getting upset about? So I think maybe she's starting to kind of internalize that.
Is she in kindergarten?
She's in pre-K this year.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good strategy. You've definitely given me some good things to think about and to apply. It's helpful too because your children are older than mine, so I have to start thinking about things I'm going to do when they're older.
Yeah, how old is your oldest son right now?
He's going to be 3 next month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 2 is when you can start kind of working on a lot of this talking, basically my goal for my kids is just learning to think about their thoughts and actions and be able to talk about it. So I feel like you can start doing that, maybe with a 2-year-old, but definitely with a 3-year-old. They can start talking about their feelings and kind of getting that distance and understanding that your beliefs can influence your emotions. Obviously, they're not going to understand it at that level, but if you work with your kids from the time they're little, it will come much more naturally to them when they are old enough.
That's good. I like that optimism.
Yeah. It's kind of an experiment, but we'll see.
Okay, well, yeah, this has been great. This is very helpful for me, and I hope that it'll be helpful for our viewers as well.
I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and if people want more information about the kind that we've talked about today, they can go to your website, which is A Parent Stoic, because you write exclusively about parenting and Stoicism. Yes. There's a lot of really helpful things on there. Okay, well, thank you, Brittany.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.